The duel that shook the throne. The twin suns burned high above the red sand arena. Thousands of alien eyes stared down in silence. Banners of black and gold waved in the hot wind. The Queen of Zarth stood tall on her obsidian throne, her long violet robes trailing, behind her like a shadow. This was no ordinary day. This was judgment. Day for the human. Commander. Rion Vance stepped into the arena with nothing but a blade on his back and dust on his boots. No armor, no shield. Just his eyes, calm and steady, scanning the massive figure across from him. His opponent was not a man, not even close. Gortak, the Queen's personal war champion, stood like a living mountain, nearly 9 feet tall. His body was wrapped in bone-plated armor grown from his own flesh. His arms were thick as trees. His snarl echoed through the arena like thunder. The Zarthian crowd hissed and howled, chanting Gortak's name. The Queen watched from above, her expression unreadable. "He is unarmed," said one of her advisors. "This will be over in seconds." She said nothing. Her golden eyes remained locked on the human. A loud gong rang. The trial by combat had begun. Gortak charged. Rion didn't move. Sand flew beneath the giant's pounding feet. The ground shook. He raised a jagged blade the size of a door and swung it toward the human skull. But the blade hit nothing. Rion had already moved. He ducked under the strike like a breeze, spun around and slashed once. The crowd gasped. A clean cut now marked the side of Gortak's leg. Purple blood dripped into the sand. Gortak roared, enraged. He charged again. This time he spun, claws outstretched, swinging wildly. Rion ducked, rolled, and sliced another line across the monster's back. Another roar. Another wound. The crowd began to shift. The chanting stopped. Confusion spread like wildfire. Who was this human? He was fast, too fast. Every move was precise, not wild, not reckless. Calm, patient, deadly. Gortak screamed and leapt high into the air. Rion waited, and when the champion came down like a falling meteor, Rion did not run. He stepped forward. One clean strike. A single silver flash in the sunlight. Then silence. The champion landed hard on the sand. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then slowly, Gortak's body split, cleanly, from shoulder to hip. The two halves fell apart, spilling blood and organs into the arena dust. The silence turned to screams. Some screamed in awe, some in horror, others in fear. Rion stood in the center, unmoving, his blade stained but steady. Above, the Queen rose from her throne. Her long fingers tightened on the edge of the railing. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but it echoed through the arena like a bell of doom. "By law," she said, "he owns us." Gasps rippled through the court. An old law, a forgotten law, one carved into the stones of their ancestors. If any outsider defeated the throne's chosen champion, they could claim the Queen's royal court. Not just power, not just title, but her advisors, her servants, her concubines, her royal maidens, even the Queen herself. Rion looked up at her. He said nothing. The Queen's expression did not change, but something flickered in her golden eyes. Not hatred, not fear. Something else. A question. Guards rushed the arena, but not to arrest him. Not anymore. They bowed, and one of them handed Rion a black scroll with gold edges, the seal of the royal law. He was now the legal owner of the Queen's court. Rion looked at the scroll for a long moment. Then he looked up at the Queen. She looked down at him. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them blinked. Only the wind moved between them. Somewhere in the crowd, a whisper began, just one word. Human. Then another. Voice, human, then louder, human, until the entire arena chanted in unison. Human. 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 Rion turned and walked out of the arena without a word, and behind him, the empire of Zarth began to change forever. Royal chains and ancient laws, the walls of the Zarthian palace were tall and smooth like glass, carved from black stone mined from the planet's deepest veins. Torchlight flickered along the arched ceilings, casting strange shadows that danced across murals of past conquests. Alien servants lined the hallways in silence, their faces masked, their posture rigid. None dared to speak. None dared to look at the human directly. Commander Rion Vance followed the procession in silence. A dozen ceremonial guards flanked him, their weapons holstered, their steps synchronized. They treated him not as a prisoner, not even as a guest. but as something far more dangerous. A rightful claimant, a living weapon who had done what no other being had achieved in 1,000 years. They led him through the royal corridor, the air thick with incense and history. Stone pillars bore the carvings of fallen kings and dead warriors, and now somewhere in the deepest chamber of the palace, alien scribes were already carving a new face into the wall. A human face. Rion hated it. At the end of the hall, golden doors opened with a deep hum. The throne chamber glowed with pale blue light, and there, seated on the crescent throne of Zarth, was the queen. She no longer wore her battle robes. Now she was draped in ceremonial silk, her eyes outlined with silver, her fingers adorned with ancient rings that once crowned gods. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture was not proud today. It was controlled, quiet, heavy. Around her stood her inner court, 12 royal concubines, perfect in their symmetry, tall, silver-skinned, their eyes glowing with soft bioluminescence, each one genetically enhanced, trained from birth to serve the queen's command in body and soul. They knelt, heads bowed low before the human. "You will now receive your claim," said the royal adjudicator, stepping forward. He held an orb in his hands. It pulsed with red light. "By law, the queen's court, her blood rights, and her royal inheritance pass to you as victor of the sacred duel." Rion didn't respond. The adjudicator continued. "You may now take the queen's oath of bonding, and the royal court will become your property. Your children, if produced, will inherit this throne." "Stop," Rion said. His voice was calm, but it cut through the ceremony like a blade through silk. The adjudicator looked up, confused. "Stop, Lord Conqueror." "I don't want property," Rion said. "I don't want courts or titles or slaves. I didn't come here to take your throne." A murmur passed through the chamber. The concubines looked up, uncertain. Even the queen's breath caught for a moment. "I came," Rion said slowly, "to protect humanity. Not to own you," he turned to the queen. "You can keep your throne. I won't touch you or them. I didn't fight to rule. I fought to survive." The silence in the chamber became heavier. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the queen rose from her throne. Her steps were quiet, measured. She walked toward Rion slowly, stopping just an arm's length away. Up close, her presence was overwhelming, not just regal but powerful. And yet, in this moment, she seemed different, less untouchable. She studied him. "You do not want what is yours by law?" she asked. "I want peace," he answered. Her eyes searched his face. "Then you are a strange kind of conqueror." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe your laws are the real enemy." The queen's eyes narrowed. "That law was made to stop war, to give tribes a way to settle blood without genocide. And yet it lets men own women," Rion replied. "Or women own men." Behind them, the royal court listened in silence. Some looked ashamed, others curious. But one among them, Ilana, the queen's first companion, lifted her gaze and watched the human with something different in her eyes, not fear, not awe, but thought. Rion turned to leave. "Where will you go?" The queen asked. "Back to my ship," he said. "Unless you plan to kill me. You are protected by sacred right," she replied. "None may harm you, but you may not leave until your claim is processed." Rion looked over his shoulder. "Then process this. My claim is refusal. I claim nothing." He walked out, leaving behind the throne, the crown, and the silent queen who stared after him. And in the shadows, Ilana whispered to herself, "He fights like a monster, but speaks like a king." Her court turns against her. Night fell over the capital of Zarth, but the city did not rest. The twin moons hung like watchful eyes over the palace spires, casting long shadows through crystal corridors and over obsidian bridges. The air buzzed with whispers. Not the usual songs of loyalty or chants of devotion, but questions, doubts, the kind of thoughts that fester quietly until they become rebellion. Within the heart of the palace, Queen Zira sat alone in her meditation chamber. The floor beneath her was shaped from memory crystal, alive with glowing veins that pulsed with her heartbeat. She sat cross-legged, eyes closed, trying to steady her breath, but peace refused to come. The image would not leave her mind, the human, standing over Gortak's broken body, the impossible way his blade had moved, clean, silent like a thought made metal, and then the words, "I claim nothing." Never in all the centuries of Zarthian rule had a victor refused the queen's court. Never had the throne been left untouched. He had every right, by blood, by ritual, by law. And yet he walked away. Zira had been raised in a world where strength meant control, and control was everything. But now that certainty trembled beneath her like a cracked foundation. For the first time since her coronation, she felt something rare and dangerous. She felt exposed. Beyond the chamber walls, her court stirred. Aelina, the queen's first companion and longest-serving confidant, paced the length of the concubine hall. Her sisters watched her, their robes flowing like water, their thoughts heavy. She could feel their unease, taste it in the silence between their glances. "You saw it," one of them finally whispered. "He could have taken us." "He didn't. He rejected us," another muttered. "As if we're unworthy." "No," Aelina said sharply. "Not unworthy. Undesired, and that is what makes him dangerous." They turned to her. "You think he's planning something?" one asked. Aelina shook her head. "No, that's the danger. He has no plan, no ambition. But he still broke our champion. Still commands the loyalty of half the court now, not because he demanded it, because he earned it." A pause. Then another voice. "Shouldn't that be the way? To follow one who does not need to ask?" Aelina's eyes narrowed. That was the kind of thought that could get someone executed in old times. But these were no longer the old times. The palace itself felt different. The human had been here only one day, and yet already the balance of power had shifted. Across the palace, in the strategy chamber, the queen's advisors gathered without her. They stood in a circle, voices low, tones sharp. Some were nervous, others angry, but all shared one thought. "We must contain this," said High Counselor Varrock. "His presence is breaking the spine of our culture." "Or waking it," muttered another. "He is not even taking power, and still he controls it." Varrock snapped. "Half the guards now whisper his name like a war song. We cannot allow this human to undermine our queen's authority." "He hasn't undermined her," said General Kellic, stepping from the shadows. "She's undermining herself." They turned to him. "He fought with honor," Kellic continued. "And when the law gave him everything, he chose restraint. That should have elevated her in the eyes of the people. Instead, she hides. She avoids him. And in doing so, looks weak." No one disagreed. Silence fell, and then came the unthinkable. "We should approach him," Kellic said. "Offer him the throne, openly." The room exploded with protest, but the seed was planted. And in politics, a seed is all it takes. In the shadows of the outer chambers, spies and servants passed notes to hidden hands. Messages encoded in old tongue. Couriers with silent footsteps delivered rumors wrapped as truth. One by one, pillars of loyalty began to crumble. And far above, from her window, Queen Zyra watched the city below. Fires burned in the distance. Not flames of destruction, but ritual. Celebration. Zarthians lighting torches in honor of the human. They did not chant his name now. They sang it, soft songs. Reverent songs. Ancient songs once reserved only for gods and forgotten warriors. She turned from the window. Her court was splintering. Her people were changing. And the man who had caused it all hadn't even asked for it. He had just stood tall and walked away. And that, she realized with a sinking heart, made him more powerful than any king she had ever known. The blood rebellion the night the city burned. The palace felt smaller than it had in 1,000 years. Torches winked like angry stars beyond the high windows, and the smell of smoke threaded through the carved halls. Whispers had become plans, and plans had become steel. Noble houses that had smiled for generations now sharpened knives in secret. The old law had been a foundation. Rion's refusal had been a fault line. Where strength once guaranteed obedience, now uncertainty spread like water seeping through old stone. It began with a single corridor. Masked figures moved like shadows between pillars, their boots whispering on the polished floor. They were not common thieves or starving mobs. These were palace guards turned conspirators, nobles bribed into treason, and priests who believed the queen's shame had to be answered with blood. They struck quickly with precise motion, a flash here, a strangled cry there. Their goal was simple and cruel: kill the symbol who had humiliated them all. If the queen could be taken, a new ruler could be named before dawn, and the old disgrace might be buried in a single night. Rion felt the change before the first blade rose. He was in the outer gallery watching the moonlight pool like silver on the stone, when the alarm bell sounded. 3 low tolls that meant sacred rites violated. Instinct tightened every muscle in his body. He did not wait for orders. He ran. Corridors blurred. Banners that once declared loyalty now fell to the floor under trampled feet. Servants pushed past him with eyes wide, clutching children, whispering, "They come." The palace had never seen such movement. It felt ancient and brittle, as if every long-kept secret were a rope being pulled free. The ambush caught many by surprise. Guards who had believed themselves loyal hesitated when faced with men they had trained beside. Some turned their blades toward their new masters. Others froze, torn between oath and fear. The conspirators moved to the inner sanctum where the queen maintained her ritual of dawn and midnight. They did not expect Rion. They did not expect one so small, so alone, to stand between them and the throne. The first attacker reached the queen's chamber with a blade raised. A scream swallowed by the echoing hall. A flash of motion, a metal whisper. Rion's blade met the strike. The sound was not loud, but it cut through the panic like clarity. He moved not with anger but with a strange precision, parrying and stepping, catching the killer in the chest with a controlled shove that sent him crashing against a carved statue. Another came, then another. The palace, built for ceremony, became a place of brutal private fights. Rion fought to keep them from the queen, but even as he held the line, one of the conspirators lunged from above. The blade grazed the queen's robe. The fabric split with a soft, terrible sound. There was a moment that stretched between heartbeats. The queen, Zira, stood very still with her hand pressed to where the cloth had torn. For an instant she looked like any wounded creature. A flash of shock and pain. Then something that looked like loss passed over her face. Rion saw it. He saw not the rage the court expected, but a small private grief, as if a private bond had been torn as surely as the fabric. Without thinking, he moved again, but this time not to fight. He reached past the men and into the queen's space, guiding her low and behind a broken screen, placing his body between her and the knives. The attackers hesitated, their fury meeting a steel wall they had not planned for. A human who did not take advantage, who kept his own hands free to shield rather than claim. When the last blade fell silent and the conspirators scattered into the maze of the palace, the chamber filled with heavy breaths and the smell of iron. Candles guttered. Zira's hair was loose, a rare thing. The rings on her fingers had slipped. She remained seated on the cold floor with Rion crouched beside her like a guard of a different kind. For a long moment, neither spoke. The palace seemed to hold its breath. "Why did you save me?" Her voice was rough, almost foreign in its soft edge. It was not a question of gratitude, but of disbelief. Rion did not answer immediately. He looked at the torn fabric by her knee, at the faint dust where Gortak had once stood, at the way her shoulders seemed smaller in the dim light. "Because he said finally, "I saw you flinch. When I struck the champion, you flinched. You loved him." The confession landed between them like a thrown stone and made small ripples. Zira's eyes widened, not with anger but with a vulnerability that had been hidden behind years of iron will. She had never admitted such a thing aloud. Love in Zarthian terms was complicated. Bondmates, ritual ties, engineered partnerships designed for strength. To admit a personal bond was to invite judgment. Yet here, in a ruined chamber with the smell of smoke and the echo of steel, she let the admission come without polish. "He was my bondmate," she whispered. "The law and the ritual made him more than a warrior. He was the shape of my nights." Rion's face did not change. He had expected proud denial or a sharpened blade. Instead, he found the queen uncloaked. He reached out not to claim but to steady. And in that touch there was no triumph, only a human steadiness that surprised them both. They moved then, not back to the throne but away from it into the servants' tunnels beneath the palace where old pipes and secret doors wove a path under the city. There, among the rats and the hidden stores, they sat shoulder to shoulder and watched the capital from the edges. They listened as the rebellion changed into 100 small fires, as noble houses lit signal beacons, and as the people below argued in shocked voices about what the night had shown them. In the dim, it was impossible to tell who had lost more, the queen who had watched her champion die, or the empire that had thought law could bind what people would not accept. Rion and Zira did not speak of power then. They spoke of the odd, fragile things that make people human across any world. Grief, confusion, and the small, brave need to choose. Outside, the city burned. Inside, in a hidden place, two leaders who had been forced into one another's company began, for the first time, to understand the cost of law and the weight of mercy. The choice of the conqueror. The fires had burned out, but the smoke still lingered. Black tendrils curled through the higher rafters of the palace, leaving the scent of rebellion in the very stones. The marble corridors, once pristine and cold, now bore the dark stains of betrayal, blood, soot, and something deeper, Trust had bled here. Queen Zira stood at the high balcony overlooking the inner court, her robes plain, her crown absent. Her hair hung loose, a rare sight, and her fingers fidgeted at the folds of her sash. For once there were no guards beside her, no advisors, only silence. And Rion? He stood across from her on the opposite side of the chamber, arms folded. His shoulder was bandaged but still stiff, and a fresh bruise bloomed across his ribs from the night's defense. Yet he said nothing about pain. His eyes were fixed on her, waiting, not with judgment, not even with expectation, just waiting. She finally broke the silence. "They said I must choose," she murmured. "Choose to rule beside you, or fade into ceremony, to become a relic." Rion didn't reply at first. Instead, he stepped forward, slow and steady, his boots echoing against the stone. "You always had a choice, but you were never given space to see it." "You don't understand my world," she said, voice cracking. "We were raised under laws written in bone. Every queen before me knew that strength is obedience. If you break law, you shatter the empire. If you show mercy, they say you are soft. If you fall in love, they call it weakness." Rion's eyes softened. "I don't want to be your weakness," she looked at him. "Then what do you want?" He took another step closer until only a breath stood between them. "I want to give you the freedom to be strong in your own way. Not because someone died for you. Not because a scroll said you must bear heirs, but because you choose to lead differently." The queen exhaled slowly. "They say your bloodline would be welcomed, that the throne would accept it, that my children would be half human. And what do you say?" he asked. She looked at him, not the warrior who had slain her bondmate, not the alien who had humiliated her court, but the man who had protected her without chains, who had walked away when power was offered. And for the first time, she saw not an enemy of tradition, but the birth of something new. Before she could speak, footsteps approached. Aelana entered quietly, followed by 3 of the royal concubines. They were not in their ceremonial veils. They wore light armor and walked with confidence, less like handmaidens, more like guardians. "The court gathers," Aelana said. "The nobles demand resolution. The rebellion fractured loyalties. The people want to know if they still have a queen, or a king." Zira nodded. "And what do you want, Aelana?" The companion paused. "I want to serve something worth serving," she said simply. "He is no tyrant, and you are no longer the woman who ruled from fear. You're both becoming something greater. We all see it." The queen looked back at Rion. The silence stretched long. Then she whispered, "And if I say yes? If I choose you, not by law, but by will?" Rion didn't smile. He didn't reach for her. He simply answered, "Then we change everything." And so she chose. In the grand chamber where emperors were crowned and blood rites were carved, Queen Zira stood beside the human who had refused to conquer her. She took his hand, not as property, not as a vessel, but as a partner. Before the gathered lords, generals, and remaining loyalists, she spoke. "Today I do not yield my throne. I share it. I do not submit to a new master. I walk beside a man who taught me power without chains. From this day forward, the old law dies, and a new age begins." Gasps echoed, and then applause, some slow, hesitant. But others grew louder. Concubines, guards, advisors, even those once doubting, now overwhelmed by the unity they never thought possible. Rion didn't raise a blade. He didn't make a speech. He simply stood beside her, quiet and calm. And in that silence, he conquered something no human had before. Not a throne, not an empire, but hearts. The rebirth of a throne dawn rose slowly over the city of Zarth, brushing pale gold across towers once blackened by rebellion. A soft mist curled between the rooftops, and for the first time in weeks there was no screaming in the streets, no marching of boots, no clanging of alarms. Instead, there was stillness, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, but before people truly believe the sky will stay clear. Inside the palace, change moved not with fire and sword, but with ink and speech. The queen and the human now shared the throne, not as empress and servant, not as mistress and consort, but as equals. A concept so alien to the high court that many still could not speak of it without stumbling. Ancient texts were being rewritten. Seals once reserved for one bloodline now bore 2 symbols, the dragon crest of Zarth and the rising star of Earth. And yet, not everyone embraced the new dawn. The old guard remained bitter. Noble families whispered behind veils of civility. They said the queen had fallen too far. They called Rion a soft conqueror, a trickster who had used honor as a weapon, bending culture to his quiet will. They called him dangerous because he had refused power, and still ended up with it. In the Chamber of Reform, once a place for ceremonial meetings, real decisions were now being made. Rion stood before a table strewn with old scrolls, blueprints, and translated Earth doctrines. His hands were steady, his voice calm as he spoke of education, of trade with human colonies, of lifting the warrior class out of blood vows and into civic service. The council listened, some with curiosity, others with clenched jaws. "You want to replace our champions with teachers?" asked one general, sneering. "I want your champions to survive long enough to teach," Rion replied, and from the corner of the room, the Queen smiled, not because he had won an argument, but because he had spoken without raising his voice. Strength, she was learning, did not always roar. Outside, in the palace training grounds, a different kind of battle took place. Aelana and several royal maidens now trained openly in combat, not for display, but for defense. Their silk robes replaced by light armor, their hands calloused from real blades. They had chosen to serve the new rule not through obedience but purpose, and they trained not for their queen nor for Rion, but for a future where they could protect others as they had once longed to protect themselves. Watching them was a group of palace children, born of the court's lesser houses. They whispered in excitement, watching women who had once danced now duel, watching warriors who smiled while fighting, not for glory but for something more enduring. Legacy. At night, the throne hall changed too. Once cold and untouchable, it now hosted public forums. Citizens, commoners, and elites alike were allowed to speak. Their voices carried to the balcony where Zira and Rion sat, sometimes together, sometimes apart, but always listening. The Queen had changed. Her once impenetrable silence now gave way to questions. She asked for counsel, sought perspective. She still ruled, yes, but her rule no longer walked on the bones of tradition. It walked beside the living. Rion changed too. He remained quiet in public, but behind closed doors he became the architect of soft revolutions. He turned assassins into guards, skeptics into thinkers, warlords into planners. Not all succeeded. Not all wanted to, but enough did. And slowly, painfully, the throne began to heal. Still, not everyone was ready to let go of the past. One evening, as the moons rose, Rion walked the outer garden where his name had been carved onto a new pillar. It was meant as honor, but he hated it. It felt like a grave. A man approached, a noble from the old high bloodlines. Draped in dark silk, his hands empty, his words laced with poison. "You changed the queen," he said. "You made her weak." Rion didn't respond. The noble stepped closer. "She kneels to the people now. What next? Will she milk a goats with them?" Rion looked at the moonlight filtering through the trees. "She kneels because she's strong enough to rise again. And if milking goats means knowing what her people eat, maybe she should," the noble snarled. "We will remember what you've done, and one day you won't be here to protect her." Rion finally turned, his voice low. "You don't understand. She doesn't need protection anymore." And that was the truth. The queen who once wore steel-like skin now walked among her people, her eyes open. She no longer ruled from behind walls. She ruled from within her people's gaze. Not feared, not worshipped, trusted. And beside her stood the man who never asked for a crown, but gave her the strength to reshape hers. Together, they had not just survived the rebellion, they had rebirthed the throne. He who split a champion, the name Rion Vance, had spread beyond the crimson sands of Zarth, beyond its black towers and twin moons. It traveled on trader ships through encoded military transmissions, whispered in alien marketplaces, inscribed onto prayer walls of species long thought indifferent to human affairs. But on Zarth, his name was not just legend, it was law rewritten. In the Great Hall of Archives, deep beneath the throne, artisans worked tirelessly carving the final lines into the living crystal walls that recorded the Empire's history. Their fingers trembled as they etched the human's likeness, unarmored, unadorned, yet holding a blade with the calm authority of one who had no need to prove anything. Above that image was a single line, in both Zarthian script and Terran English: "He who split a champion, but never claimed a throne." The galaxy had not forgotten the day Rion Vance walked into the arena alone and left it with an empire at his feet. But what came after was more dangerous than any duel. It was morning now. Quiet. The city below hummed with life, not the anxious, watchful stillness of a place ruled by fear, but the steady rhythm of people waking, working, laughing. There was color in the streets again. Vendors shouted prices. Children ran barefoot through the lower courts. The scars of rebellion had faded, if not vanished. Queen Azira stood at the balcony of her private quarters, wrapped in a robe of soft gray. No jewels, no ceremonial chains, just fabric and thought. Behind her, the room was empty. She had sent away her maids and even Elana, just for a moment of quiet. She watched the horizon, and then felt him before she heard him. Rion's presence was never loud, but it always changed the air. He stepped beside her without a word, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the same skyline. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "They think you'll leave." Rion didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a data crystal. He handed it to her. "A ship is coming," he said, "from the core systems. Not mine, not yours, but they've heard the stories." She turned the crystal over in her fingers. "Diplomatic?" "No," he said. "Military." She inhaled, her shoulders tightening. "And they see Zarth as weak now. Ruled by kindness, they see it as changed," Rion replied. "And anything that changes is either feared or destroyed." She nodded slowly. "Then you're going to fight them?" "No," he said. "Not unless I must, but I'll speak to them. Show them what changed." "Who changed?" She looked at him for a long time. "And if you don't come back?" Rion's voice was low. "Then remember what we built. Make sure they do too." She stepped closer, almost touching him. "You changed me," she whispered. "You split more than just Gortak. You split my certainty, and I hated you for it, until I didn't." "I know," he said gently. "I don't want you to go. I don't want to leave," he admitted. "But sometimes, the thing worth protecting isn't where you stand. It's what you leave standing." Their hands met, not as queen and warrior, but as two souls who had bled beside each other, grown beside each other, and dared to hope. When Rion left the palace that day, there were no parades, no banners, but thousands lined the streets in silence, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. He passed warriors who had once sworn to kill him, now guarding his path, past nobles who once schemed against him, now bowing with respect, past children who once feared the human ghost, now waving tokens and handmade charms for luck. He reached the spaceport. His shuttle waited. The stars above seemed a little closer. Before he stepped aboard, he turned one last time and looked back. Queen Zira stood on the balcony, not alone. Elena, the court, the council, they all stood behind her, and not one of them bowed. They raised their hands in a warrior salute. Rion smiled, not for victory, not for legacy, but for possibility. And then he boarded the ship, vanishing into the sky like a whisper carried by stars. The galaxy would remember many things: the warrior who split the champion, the human who refused the throne, the man who changed an empire without ever claiming it. But for Zarth, he would be more than all those titles. He would be remembered as the one who taught them. Sometimes, the strongest conqueror is the one who chooses not to rule, but to free.